Good evening. It's good to see everybody back this evening. Great to be back this evening. I appreciate y'all's prayers for my mom. We went and saw her today, and she just came out of surgery this morning, so she didn't look good today. She was laid up and kind of out of it this afternoon, to be expected, but they found out she broke one leg in 3 different places, and the other leg she fractured, falling in the yard. And that was last night. She fell, so I'm not sure exactly how she remembered much about how she fell, but anyway, so she'll recover, but she's got a little bit of a road to recover. She's a member over at the Homer Church of Christ, so y'all keep her in your prayers. I appreciate that. This evening, we're going to be talking about wisdom. Wisdom, how we as Christians can have wisdom, how important it is for us to have wisdom. Now, first, a little bit about what wisdom is, according to the scriptures, that is. Many people have great knowledge of various things. Many people have doctorate degrees in different, with different professions and different things. But, it doesn't guarantee wisdom. The more knowledge that we have, the more facts that we know. The more facts we know does not make us, or knowing many facts does not make us wise. The more facts we know does not indicate more wisdom. No, wisdom, rather, is knowing what to do with the knowledge that we obtain. It's interesting in a way, obtaining knowledge is sometimes far easier than obtaining wisdom, because wisdom is not just memorizing facts. We can study, we can read, and gain a lot of knowledge, but wisdom comes from experience. And wisdom that we read about here in God's Word ultimately comes from God and trusting in God. We're going to find out. The Bible, when it speaks of wisdom, we see a contrast, because wisdom is the opposite of foolishness. We see this contrast very much so throughout the book of Proverbs. Throughout the book of Proverbs, over and over again, there's a contrast made. Solomon wrote the book of Proverbs. He was the wisest man to have ever lived. We'll also see here in the text this evening. But he wrote the book of Proverbs, and he makes the contrast throughout the whole book of wisdom and foolishness. Foolishness, the wise man and the foolish man, and describes what the wise man is and what the foolish man is. When we read about wisdom and foolishness in the scriptures, it's evident that wisdom is always associated with righteousness, where foolishness is always associated with unrighteousness, with sin. Proverbs 1:7 could be said to be the key passage for the book of Proverbs. And what Solomon wrote there is a very familiar verse to many of us, most likely. Solomon said, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction." So foolishness is very many times associated with sin in the scriptures. If you would open with me to 1 Kings chapter 3. Open with me to 1 Kings chapter 3, and we're going to see some things about the wisest man who ever lived, Solomon, how he gained that knowledge initially, and forgetting how to speak this evening, but how he gained that knowledge initially, of that wisdom, and the attitude he had in obtaining that wisdom that God gave him. So we're going to see 3 things here in 1 Kings chapter 3. First, we're going to see that we're going to see the steps in obtaining wisdom and then maintaining wisdom. First, the first step in having wisdom is we must be humble. And Solomon certainly was. We'll see that here in 1 Kings chapter 3. Second, we have to ask God for wisdom. We have to ask God for wisdom. He's the only one who can really give true wisdom. Third, we have to be faithful to the Lord to maintain wisdom from the Lord, and the blessings of it. So first, the first step in having wisdom is to humble ourselves, to humble yourself. Start with me here in 1 Kings chapter 3 and verse 5 and 6, and that'll give us some background of what's going on here in the text we're going to study further. Starting in verse 5, And Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, ask what I shall give thee. And Solomon said in verse 6, Thou hast showed unto thy servant David, my father, great mercy, according as he walked before thee in truth, and in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart with thee. And thou hast kept for him this great kindness, that thou hast given him a son to sit on his throne, as it is this day. So here's Solomon, God appearing to Solomon in a dream, and here's Solomon requesting, or God offering something to Solomon. We're going to see what Solomon requests. We see already here that Solomon has great humility. He doesn't have an arrogant spirit in speaking with the Lord here. He is speaking in all humility. He's understanding the privilege that he has here in the position that he is in, and as the son of David. And he's understanding the mercy of God, the blessings from God, and that all these blessings come from God. Now, read with me verse 7 and 8. And now, O Lord my God, thou hast made thy servant king instead of David my father. And I am but a little child. I know not how to go out or come in. And thy servant is in the midst of thy people, which thou hast chosen, a great people, that cannot be numbered nor counted for multitude. So Solomon takes his first step in obtaining wisdom. He's humble. He's humble. He doesn't have any arrogance about him whatsoever. He refers to himself as a servant, and then refers to himself as a little child that doesn't know what he's doing. He's humble. The humility is recognizing that we're blessed just to be servants of God, as God's people. We're blessed no matter what the capacity of service we serve in the Lord's kingdom. We're blessed just to be God's servant, and we should be grateful just to be God's servant. And whatever the task is that God has for us, we have to rely on God in order to be able to do that task. Solomon seems to indicate that he is thinking this is his thought process. This is how he is viewing himself here. He's relying on God. He understands he can't lead these people without God's help, without wisdom he's about to request from God. He recognizes this task that lie before him, and he feels extremely inadequate to accomplish this task, to be the king of this great people who God has brought up, Israel. It's very similar to Moses. Moses, in the same way, God knew that he was able and ready to lead God's people out of Egypt back in Exodus. What did Moses say? He didn't think he was ready. He didn't believe he was ready. He didn't want to do it. He tried to shy away from it. Yet God knew that he was ready. And God gave him what he needed to do the task that God had given him to do. Many of the prophets that God chose to specifically give God's message to the people of Israel, many of these prophets, they were just mere farmers, poor farmers. They didn't have any great background of any sort, any great schooling of any sort. Yet God chose them and used them in a way they never could have imagined, because they humbled themselves before God and submitted to what God would have them do, and trusted in God instead of themselves. When Peter was approached by Jesus, he couldn't think of anything but what a sinful man he was, his inadequacy. Yet, Jesus chose Peter to be one of the 12 apostles, and Peter ended up being the one who preached at Pentecost and wrote 3 books of the Bible, or 2 books of the Bible, 1st and 2nd Peter, an elder in the church, an apostle of Jesus Christ. Well, the same is true for us today. If we are truly humble, we may feel inadequate to do the task that God has laid before us. But if we understand that with God, we can do it. If we trust in Him, then we can do the task that God has for us to do. God, the Lord, He blesses those and uses those who are truly humble before Him. In fact, James said, James 4:6, God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace unto the humble. And in James 4:10, James says, humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and He shall lift you up. I believe we have a song that goes with that verse to help us remember that. Proverbs 16:18, Solomon wrote, "Pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall." So it seems throughout Scripture, certainly it is throughout Scripture, we see that pride always prevents wisdom, always prevents God's blessing. But humility always brings God's blessings, and humility always goes hand in hand with wisdom. This morning we spoke of that centurion in Matthew chapter 8. And what was one of the key characteristics of this centurion? He was humble before Jesus. He wasn't arrogant. He wasn't full of pride, but he was full of humility. Second, we learned from Solomon here that we must ask God for wisdom. And we can ask God for wisdom, just as Solomon did. Solomon says here in verse 9, "Give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad. For who is able to judge this thy so great people?" So Solomon still in this verse shows humility and appreciation for how great God is and how great his people are, and how inadequate he feels for this task. But he asked God for something. He asked God for an understanding heart, for wisdom, the ability to discern. And we see here in a moment that God gives him just what he asked for. Well, Solomon received a miraculous blessing. We also see here in this passage that he became more wise than anyone that was ever before him, or anyone who would rise after him, and certainly anyone who was around during his day, any other kings. And we see throughout the rest of 1 Kings that Solomon, other people come from other nations to see Solomon's great wisdom. They're enamored by Solomon and the way he builds up the wealth in Israel. Well, God's probably not going to give us wisdom that causes us to become like Solomon was. Certainly, in the New Testament, we're still told to ask for wisdom. Christians are told to ask for wisdom today. James said in James 1:5, "If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him." God's not going to scold us if we ask for wisdom. No, he's going to give it to us. It's something that he wants us to ask for. It's a noble thing for us to desire, just as it's a noble thing for Solomon to desire. He's going to be pleased with us for asking for wisdom. He was certainly pleased with Solomon's request of asking for wisdom. Read with me verses 10 through 13. "And the speech pleased the Lord," this speech that Solomon asked for, this understanding heart, that Solomon asked this thing. Verse 11, "God said unto him, Because thou hast asked this thing, and hast not asked for thyself long life, neither hast asked riches for thyself, nor hast asked the life of thine enemies, but hast asked for thyself understanding to discern judgment." Good definition for what we call wisdom. Verse 12, "Behold, I have done it according to thy words. Lo, I have given thee a wise and understanding heart, so that there was none like thee before thee, neither after thee shall any rise like unto thee. And I have also given thee that which thou hast not asked, both riches and honor, so that there shall not be any among the kings like unto thee all thy days." Solomon asked for this blessing, and God gave him this blessing. Now, God will give us wisdom. We don't know exactly how he does that today. He gave it to Solomon miraculously, and this wisdom certainly was a miraculous wisdom from God that helped him build the nation of Israel to a point where he could build the temple that God had wanted to be built, and expand their borders and many other things. Well, today we're told to ask for wisdom. We don't know exactly how God gives that wisdom. Probably in more than one way he gives us wisdom. But certainly, if we ask God for wisdom, we can be sure that he's going to give it to us, because James makes clear that he will. Now, last, we're going to see from Solomon here in verse 14 that these blessings that God gave, were conditional on whether Solomon continued to be faithful to God. Here in verse 14, read with me. This is what God says to Solomon: if thou wilt walk in my ways, that's God's ways, to keep my statutes and my commandments as thy father David did walk, then I will lengthen thy days. And if, there's a condition there that God gave Solomon. Yes, I'm going to bless you with this. I'm going to give you this. And he says he will bless him if he continues to walk as his father David walked. Now we know his father David certainly was not perfect. He had been foolish in the area of women, just like Solomon later is. Here he's very humble, but later we know that Solomon accumulates 900 different wives, or 700 wives and 300 concubines, so 1,000 wives of some sort or another. So certainly he made some foolish decisions, and David certainly accumulated many wives and even fell into or chose to commit adultery. But David overall walked in God's ways. He was repentant and he was faithful to God. Now, we learn from Solomon's life that he did not stay faithful to God. God gives him this miraculous wisdom, this miraculous ability to discern, and he uses this ability to build up the nation of Israel and to honor God initially. But later, all these hundreds of wives he accumulates, the ones that are from pagan nations. Eventually he allows them, these wives, to turn his heart away from God into idolatry. He turns completely away from God. That's not something we see with his father David. His father David had made many mistakes, but he was never given to idolatry, and Solomon certainly was. And despite these blessings that Solomon received at the beginning of his life, what happens when he's an old man? When Solomon writes Ecclesiastes, he's an old man. He's nearing the end of his life, in the end of his reign in Israel. And if you read Ecclesiastes, it's very obvious he's depressed. He is confused. He's broken down completely. And why is that? Well, because despite the wisdom God gave him, he didn't always use it very well. Because Solomon ended up being given to sin. Sin caused Solomon to fall, just like it would cause us to fall. This wisdom that God gave Solomon did not guarantee that Solomon's heart was going to be right. He had to keep his heart right. The wisest man who ever lived ended up rebelling against God. What does that say about us? Well, we're just as likely to end up rebelling against God if we do not make staying faithful to God our first priority. The question for us, will we choose to ask God for wisdom? It's certainly appropriate to include asking for wisdom in our daily prayers. Asking for wisdom about certain situations that we anticipate facing, or certain situations we know we will face or we may face, certain conversations we may have, certain decisions that we may have to make. Certainly it's appropriate for us to ask God for wisdom in those things, and he will bless us with that wisdom. We can ask ourselves this evening, when was the last time you or I asked for wisdom in our prayers? We can ask for God for wisdom in our prayers, and this evening as we close, if you are struggling with something and you need the church's prayers this evening for encouragement or help in any way, we're here for you. Or if you happen to be here and you've not obeyed the gospel, put on Christ in baptism, we would love nothing more than to assist you with that as well this evening. If you have any need at all this evening, you have an opportunity to come as we stand and sing.